I'd like to start out by thanking the organizers of TiEcon and especially Lakshmi for giving me this opportunity to share with you a project that my students and I have had the privilege of initiating and sustaining over the past few years. This is a project that sits at the confluence of a humanitarian mission and a scientific quest. And I want you to take away one message from this project, and that is there are opportunities, extremely exciting opportunities sitting in front of us that allow us to be good Samaritans and good scientists, good doctors, good engineers. So the humanitarian mission has its genesis in this disturbing fact. 1 in every 100 Indians is blind. And if you look at the incidence of childhood blindness in India, that incidence is at least 3 times as high in India as it is in the West. And this untreated childhood blindness in India has devastating consequences for the children. These are just some of the things that blind children have to face: a much shortened lifespan, tremendously high childhood mortality rate, less than half of all children born blind live to see their second birthday, vanishingly small prospects for education and employment. So there's a clear humanitarian need to provide treatment to such children. We as scientists are also extremely fortunate in that in meeting this humanitarian need, we have an amazing opportunity to understand how vision develops. If you have a child who hasn't seen from birth, say for the first 10 years of his life, and you are able to surgically initiate sight in that child, then from the very first day that the bandages are removed, you have a ringside seat into the process of visual learning, an opportunity that science has not had thus far. Seeing this perfect complementarity between science and the humanitarian mission, we launched a project called Project Prakash a few years ago. The name comes from the idea that in bringing light into the lives of blind children, we also have an opportunity to shine light on some deep questions of science. So Prakash starts out by going out into the remote villages of India, identifying children who have treatable blindness. These children are then brought to New Delhi. They provided the very best surgical care possible. And once the child begins to see, then we have the research question open to us, understanding how vision develops after the. But before we can get to the question of how vision develops, we have to seriously consider whether vision is going to develop at all in these children. The dogma in neuroscience, a long-held dogma in neuroscience, has been that of critical periods of development. That if the brain is deprived of visual stimulation for the first few years of life, say the first 4 or 5 years of life, that constitute a critical window, then forevermore the child will stay blind. Even if you treat the eyes, the brain is simply not going to be able to make sense of that visual information. And these are just a few of the papers that have looked at that notion of critical periods. Especially notable is the work of David Hubel and Torsten Wiesel, who won the Nobel Prize in 1981 for some of these studies. But most of these studies have been conducted with animals, mice, rats, kittens. The question that gnawed at me was whether the same story holds for the human brain. Is the brain of a human child also going to be unable to make sense of visual information if the eyes are treated surgically at a late age, say at the age of 8, in the case of the child on the left, or even much later, in the 20s? So this is a question that has remained open all this time, and with Project Prakash, we have an opportunity to get at this issue. So we have looked directly at brain changes in the Prakash children using non-invasive brain imaging technologies such as functional magnetic resonance imaging, and what we are finding is truly surprising. As a representative example, I'm going to show you the brain state in a 20-year-old individual before surgery and then at various time points after surgery. The details of the analysis are not important. What you're seeing here is a computationally flattened map of the cortex, of the cerebral cortex. And what you see is that state of the brain 2 days prior to surgery, a week after surgery, a month after surgery, and then 4 months after surgery. Glossing over the details, what's evident is that there's tremendous change happening in the functional organization of the brain, even in the brain of a 20-year-old. So the visual cortex is reorganizing dramatically in just a matter of a few months. There's tremendous plasticity in the brain, even well beyond the conventionally defined periods of critical visual input. And we have several pieces of data that corroborate this. But perhaps the most compelling way to show the effect of this surgery on a child's life is to show you a little video of one of the children, pre-surgery and post-surgery. So you see an 11-year-old girl, Sumitra. This is pre-surgery. We've asked Sumitra to find a box of chocolates in the hospital corridor. And what you notice is that Sumitra's vision at this point is so highly compromised that she's completely unable to do this task. At this point, she's simply able to tell light from dark. Thank you. Every such transformation that we witness is truly remarkable. We never get tired of seeing this. So this is essentially an anecdote, but we have to follow up these anecdotes rigorously, and indeed we have done so. We have studied various aspects of visual performance in many of these children. Low-level aspects of visual performance, things like contrast sensitivity, acuity, how clear the vision is, your ability to perceive motion, and also higher-order aspects of vision, things like object recognition or face recognition, the ability to recognize one's parents or friends. And in most of these dimensions, we find an amazing improvement in visual capabilities from before to after surgery, underscoring the tremendous plasticity that the brain has even late in childhood. These findings have begun to have a significant impact on both the scientific world and also the non-scientific world. Here is an article on Project Prakash in Nature. We have also been featured in many popular publications. Here's an article from Time magazine. And I show this not for self-aggrandization, but rather to make the point that these kinds of articles allow us to get this message across to the policymakers who are deciding whether or not to treat children who are past this putative critical period. Our message to them is that every child, irrespective of their age, ought to be treated. Our results suggest that they all benefit. One of the recent results that I'm particularly fond of is highlighted in this New York Times article. Quite recently, we answered a question in neuroscience that had remained open for the past 3 centuries. So over 300 years ago, a scientist in Ireland by the name of William Molyneux had posed a question which had to do with the nature-nurture debate. Is it the case that the brain comes pre-wired with a connection between the senses, between touch, hearing, vision, or is this connection something that we have to learn? It's a very deep question, and William Molyneux was able to crystallize it in a particular form. He asked whether a person who has been born blind and has grown to adulthood with that blindness and has learned to distinguish between objects by touch, say he has learned to recognize a cube and a sphere by touch, if this person were to miraculously gain sight, would this person immediately upon the onset of sight be able to recognize by vision what he or she was able to recognize by touch? Does the brain come pre-wired with that mapping? Philosophers and neuroscientists had debated endlessly about this question without any empirical data. because these kinds of subjects were so hard to come by. And with Project Prakash, we finally had the right kinds of subjects, and we finally were able to answer this question. So it was a very satisfying conclusion to a deep problem in neuroscience, something that started out being formulated in the West and finally found a solution in India. But even more gratifying than answering these questions are the changes that we see in every child that we work. So far, we have screened over 40,000 children, surgically treated over 450 of them, and non-surgically treated about 1,400 of them. It's amazing to see how their lives change. Here is a child who's learning how to ride a bicycle a year after he gained sight. And here are a few children who are now beginning to express their artistic abilities a few weeks after their treatment. The slide is perhaps not showing up as well as it ought to because of the PC to Mac conversion, but Project Prakash, in the few years that it has been around, has been a very gratifying enterprise for us. It has given us some insights regarding brain plasticity and learning. It has given us some unexpected insights into autism. I would never have expected that childhood blindness would begin to intersect with autism, but it does. And it has given us a hypothesis that we are now pursuing at MIT about what might be core causes of autism. It has guided the design of artificial intelligence systems for autonomous visual learning. It has played an important role in the educational trajectories of the students, undergraduates, graduates, postdoctoral fellows who have been involved in the project. And most importantly, of course, it has alleviated, to some modest extent, the tremendous burden of childhood blindness that India has to bear. But before we get too complacent about these accomplishments, we need to consider what are the challenges ahead of us. And one of the biggest challenges ahead of Project Prakash is the challenge of scale. If you think about this green disk as representing all of the children that we have treated as part of Project Prakash thus far, this is the magnitude of the problem in India alone. So we have literally just scratched the surface. We have a very long way to go. We have to expand the scale of Project Prakash much. Our hope, and this is what we're working towards, is to establish a pediatric hospital with much greater capacity in North India, which is very densely populated, and it's also amongst the most impoverished in terms of medical resources. So we want to set up the Prakash Center for Children that will have a pediatric hospital, a school for the children who we are treating, and also a cutting-edge research facility. This is an ambitious undertaking, but I am completely confident that with everybody's support, those of us who are directly involved with Project Prakash and those of us who are hearing about Project Prakash and will hopefully become involved with Project Prakash, we will be able to accomplish this ambitious goal. Because, as we all know, in the face of large challenges, as Einstein said, those who have the privilege to know have the duty to act. And I believe we have the knowledge to tackle this problem, and it becomes a moral imperative to do something about it. Thank you.